color wheel, but to actually figure out how to apply the principles of that organization to what's in front of you. Now, in your packet should be lay-in procedure. This is just, and I'm going to walk right through it with one or two of these, and this is how I want you to lay these in. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is based, everything we're doing is in one way, shape, or form comes back to this Frank Riley. Might be slightly different language. Those of you that are going to continue or have been doing this, John Ennis has all of Riley's notes, so he's probably giving you more orthodox Frank J. Riley. Either way, you're getting the same approach. So, the lay-in procedure, as I'm going to walk you through it, I might have one of you call out for me so that I don't get ahead of myself. We have 5 color strips here, which are painted the 5 primary hues of the Munsell wheel: yellow, red, purple, blue, and green. Apologies for some of these in transit. Some of them got a little bent, but they'll do fine. And obviously, I think for those that were in here in the last 2, we have to do the best with what we have lighting-wise. I did this in the privacy of my studio. Now, if you can see that, this had a single source light, no ambient light, black bottom, nice clean shadows and transitions. That is not the case here. It's the best we can do. It is what it is. Same principles apply, same approach applies. The only thing is, I'm going to have to be very conscious that I am clearly not seeing the clarity in the shadows here that I saw here. And again, it doesn't matter. I mean, I could be anywhere. I could have a model in here. I come in and set up. The lighting situation is what it is. I have to roll with it and deal with it, period. So, first thing we have to do, though, that we did not do this morning, is deal with the chroma issue, or at least in arranging the palette, accounting for the fact that when we were doing the strings or the threads on the color wheel, the whole intention there, the whole purpose behind putting that together is not only categorizing the hues, but it's also getting a sense of what each one of these lines or strings of value, each one of these is as strong in intensity or chroma as I can get. Now, it doesn't mean that this value is as strong in chroma as that, but there's no other pigment I'm going to be able to buy that's going to be able to give me a 9 value of yellow-red that's any more chromatic than that. So at each one of these values, usually, I'm going to backtrack from this statement in a second, just make sure I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. Usually, it's as chromatic as you can get. The only exceptions, and as I mentioned earlier, the nice thing, the organic quality of this system that is rigid as it is, there's room to grow. Let's take the case of this. There are pigments that are now available that I could use as a substitute for burnt umber that would give me values in here of yellow-red that are a little more intense than what's here. Now you could say, well, why didn't you get them, Neil? Because Sean bought the paint, and for practicality's sake, this does everything I need. If I, in the course of using this color wheel, find pigments that are more intense, I can redo this string or this thread and plug them into my color wheel. So, and one that John Ennis mentioned was there's a pigment called Paraline Red that will give you reds way more chromatic than this at the darker range. But again, we're starting, and over the course of your career, using this as a base, you can begin to plug in other pigments that might end up giving you a little bit of a boost in terms of intensity in various points. But for purposes of painting, when I look up there, even just casual glance, there is not all this intensity. There's my red thread, there's my yellow. There is nowhere near this intensity on most of that. So what do I need? I need a neutralizing agent. because I need something out that's going to help me bring down the chroma of certain portions of each one of these threads to get what's in front of me. And again, those who have had the benefit of being here for the last 2 sessions, or at least certainly the last one, know exactly what I'm talking about. When you had the problem of painting the lemon, as intense as a lemon is, everywhere on that lemon is not as intense as every part of this thread or string. So at various times you're going to have to, or you had to, grab for your neutral gray to add in to your yellow to bring that intensity or that chroma down a little bit. So the first thing each one of you needs to do when you sit down, and as I said, I don't intend, you don't have to get all 5 done. You get done as many as you can in a way that is controlled and as accurate as possible, and more importantly, that you understand what you're doing, not just throwing paint around. That's not what I want to see. I want to see a measured and controlled application with the intention of trying to match the hues as best you can, hue value and chroma, I should say. First order of business is getting your string of neutrals. Now, again, thankfully, thank you, Sean, and thankfully, we have a company, Williamsburg, that actually makes these neutral grays in the 8, 6, 4, and second values. So all I did was I squeezed out the white, which is 10, the 8, the 6, the 4, the 2, and I put a little black, and I'm going to take a second to, with my brush, pull these together to get my intermediate values. That's the first thing you're going to do, because what that does on your palette is it establishes the gray scale. It establishes this scale on your palette against which you can lay your other pigments or your threads. So same way I did it before. Pull. Obviously, I don't have as far to pull. Clean, pull. Coming up with just something that falls in between. Pull, making sure to leave some of that paint right there. I need that 8. Pull the 6 up, mix them around. Now, I'll say one more time, since I just found out that we will have an authentic Riley student here next week.
No, not next week. She won't be
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
September 8th.
The portrait?
Yeah.
Riley would have had his students mix every last one of these tints out. And rightfully so, because that's part of the learning process. Understand that we are trying to find a shortcut to get us on the road. The nice thing about having the Williamsburg grays, the neutrals, is it gives bullet points that we can then, so at least there's some measure of accuracy to this, or some level of accuracy to this scale. Now, when I say neutral gray, which is what I'm using, it's not just black. What is a neutral? For those who were here. Very important. What is a neutral gray? Anyone? Come on, I'm going to pick on someone who was here before.
It has been neutralized.
That's right. As I mentioned before, any tube purchased black, oh, here's right in front of me. Any tube purchased black falls somewhere in this part of the spectrum. Now, obviously, it's not as intense, but when you're talking about like a Mars black, Mars shifts a little bit more towards purple. The lamp or ivory, they tend to hug the purple blue a little bit more, but clearly they are far less intense than anything we're using. But again, how do we know they're in the bluish range? Well, when you mix with yellow, you're going to get green. When you mix with red, you're going to get purple. So what we're trying to do then with the idea of the neutral, and Riley, this is very, very specifically Riley. For the sake of efficiency, Riley used nothing but neutral grays. He did not advocate mixing complementary colors. Why? Because all the variables that come in with complement mixing that might distort your color, or all the things that could go wrong. For the purposes of illustration, of just getting it done, the efficiency, The neutral gray can be mixed in to every one of these and bring that chroma down to any level that would be necessary. The only thing that, in my personal estimation, seeing people that paint just with the neutral, you do sacrifice a little bit of some of that color quality, that some of those happy accidents that aren't necessarily going to be there with just the straight chroma reduction with the neutral. So the neutral gray then is a black that has some, since the blacks are typically found in this area, it has something from the other side of the color wheel added to it so that it cuts that bluishness. And depending on what you use, I mean, if you looked, what Williamsburg, Sean, are you in the room? Do you know what they mixed with theirs, or they mixed a variety of things to neutralize?
Well, for them, it was important that they mixed the spectrometer, so it is as close to a Munsell. So you'll see on the back that some of them use raw umber and burnt umber in the same one. Some of them use raw umber, some of them use burnt umber. For them, it was about Munsell accuracy.
So thank you, Sean. And so it was the two umbers that they were playing with.
Well, primarily,
yeah. When you walk,
go ahead. Do it on the back.
Oh yeah, pigment yellow 43, pigment browns. Okay, all right. When you walk out of here without having to go and buy the Williamsburg grays, if you want to play around with the neutral, if you take your black, you can mix it either with a little bit of raw umber or a little bit of burnt umber, and then create your thread from that. The raw or the burnt will, in a proper proportion, neutralize that black. Now, I'll give you two formulas since we're here and you're paying me for information, right? Neutral gray number 1. Ivory black, 1 part. Raw umber, roughly 2 parts. This is an approximation. So you'd mix those two together, and then mixed with titanium white, that should give you something close to a neutral. Again, it's an approximation. And notice I specified titanium white. What is another type of white? Anyone?
Zinc white.
Right. It's some type of lead-based white. Lead-based whites, Krebnitz, flake, etc. Zinc is another one. They are warmer, and you will get a different reaction to that formula I just gave you. When you're coming up with a neutral, the key is, and look, even the brand, the formula that I just gave you is for Winsor & Newton paints. Because depending on the brand, you could get a raw umber that is more chromatic than Winsor & Newton. So all I'm mentioning is in the process of trying to come up with a neutral on your own, I gave you a formula for Winsor & Newton with titanium white. That will give you something approximating this. If you change up paint from there, you're going to have to play around with that combination to come up with something that is neutral. Okay? That's neutral 1. Neutral 2. 1 part black, ivory black, to 4 parts burnt umber. And there again, that could be a plus or minus. And I'm not taking a measuring spoon out. I'm just squeezing out dollops of paint, mixing them together.
Did you say 1 ivory black to 4 parts burnt umber?
Oh, sorry. I might have, I must have confused that with the last one. Sorry. The last one. See, it's all these formulas rolling around in my head. The raw umber should be 2 black to 1 umber. Sorry about that. Thank you, Sean.
No, for burnt umber, I think the total was 1 to 4.
Yeah, but did the first one, did I say 2 black to 1 umber?
Yes.
No.
It's 2 black to 1 umber.
The first one?
Yep. First one is 2 black to 1 raw umber. Sorry about that. Thank you, Sean.
And the second?
Then the second is 1 umber to 4 black. Both of them should be heavier on the black.
They're actually in your notes I gave you for your hue mixing directions. You'll see
Sorry about that. And the reason there's the change is that burnt umber right out of the tube is more chromatic than raw umber. So you have to use more black and less burnt to get the same type of effect.
Neil, why do they make black not black? I mean, they could.
They could, but again, it's just like what is it? I think Gamblin makes chromatic black, which is a combination of phthalo green and alizarin crimson, which is closer to neutral. I think it's just companies, there aren't a lot of people that work with, that are looking for pure neutral.
Okay.
Not to mention, it's easy to mix it up on your own. But I don't think companies, like, you don't have a lot of people that, now it's become more popular, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
With the, you know, kind of the Munsell system catching on and Riley catching on, you're more likely to find an interest, but I don't think usually people really care. I mean, they'll either mix a warm or cold black by taking the ivory and mixing a little umber or sienna in it and having it go one way or the other. But there aren't a lot of people, I think you're gonna find that need a pure neutral with the intention of taking these very chromatic intense strings down in chroma. So, okay. So the first thing when you sit down then you want to do is, the paints are all up where they normally are, grab them or we'll walk around. Just mix out your string of neutral gray, right? That is the basis upon which you're going to then lay your thread. In this case, yellow goes at the 9, there's my raw umber at the 2, threaded in between. My intention is I'm going to do the yellow and then the red. So I at least threaded what I think I'm going to need for those two. You just do them one at a time. Get them done as you can. Okay. And since my back is to you, no offense, call out a question if you have it. I might not answer, but you can ask. That was a joke.
So you had threaded the yellow from the black, not using any of the other grays up there at this point?
I didn't use any of this. I just put that out because I know I'm going to need it. And then threaded this right off the color wheel. The cad lemon and the raw umber. Right? What you're going to see I'm going to have to do is, I'm going to be going up and down in value. Value the primacy. You know, the primacy of the value is always maintained. But then you're going to see me going back and forth at various points if I need to reduce the intensity of the yellow when I'm working, which I probably will. I mean, I intentionally, and for those of you coming in next week, I intentionally kept these as chromatic as possible. The problem of chroma is not really going to come in until the workshop on Sunday next week, where I'm intentionally putting objects in front of you that are radically less chromatic than anything up here. So you have to aggressively pull that gray in to tune that chroma. But for now, I try to keep everything as intense as possible, but we still have to deal with chroma because it's one of those 3 dimensions that's going to have to be addressed at least in some way, shape, or form. Now, I'm going to get into the red in a second, and we'll get into the lay-in procedure. Now, well, we'll deal with the yellow first. No, hold on. Let me quiet myself, do a little meditation here, let me think where I want to go with this. Why did I lay out in the case of red? I have my thread, that's 5 red up there. Why did I take the time to put out a little bit of the yellow red next to it? Can anyone venture a guess why?
Because to get your lightest red, if you just used your string, you would have pink as your lightest, and you need orange to add to it to show the light on red.
That's she hit it. Ding, ding, ding. I want you in your notes, please. I want you to write. I got 3 things I want to talk about. When you're looking to paint a given local, and when I say local, what do I mean? For those who had John, he probably went over it.
The true color of the object.
The actual color. Its actual hue, value, and chroma. Right? Every object, no matter what it is, even flesh. All the complexities of flesh, which is why flesh is so wonderful to paint, right? Flesh is a semi-opaque bag of cells, not totally opaque. So if I were to pull my skin off, this actually does have a hue, value, and chroma. But because it's semi-opaque, you're able to see things coming up from underneath. So this is a dance of different colors. But if I were to pull the skin bag off, it is actually a given local. It is somewhere on the color wheel, somewhere in this range at a certain value, at a certain chroma. So even things as complex as flesh with all the nuances can be reduced to a given local that you can begin with. So, to the point at hand. When you're looking to paint a given local, there are 3 things you have to keep in mind. Number 1 is the actual local. That's the starting point. What is the actual color I think I'm dealing with? It's hue, value, and chroma. In the case of yellow, I'm telling you, because, otherwise I'd have to sit and figure it out. That's 5 yellow, value 9, strong chroma, right? It's as chromatic as possible. That's what it's painting. But every area is not as intense. But the first thing, number 1, when I'm going to paint a local, is actually understanding the local I'm dealing with. That's number 1. That's very important. Number 2, say that again, please. Were you the one that just said, why is it I had to mix out the yellow-red?
Because adding white would just make it pink or lower intensity.
What was the second part of what you
And
said?
you need to add the orange to show the light hitting the red, the light in the red.
Number 2, the second thing you need to consider is the color of the light source. In this case, there's a yellowish-orange light that is influencing each one of these locals. So my presumption would be that yellowish-orange light, yellow-red, right, sorry, excuse me. It's a yellowish light. It's a yellowish light, yellow-red light. It's somewhere in here. It is going to influence that local. And in this case, yes, when I look at the lightest part of that red, it isn't in here. It's somewhere in here. The influence of the light begins to pull that hue in that direction. Oh, I'm sorry, in this direction. So I'm starting here, but as it lightens, it's not just going here, it's actually going in this direction because it's influenced by a light that's over here. Does that make sense? Yeah. The color of the light is very important. The only time I can ever imagine I'm going to be in a situation where I'm just going to be adding white to paint that is if you had pure white light in here, no color whatsoever, which I assume I would see if I went to the Lowe's paint department and they have, pure color correct bulbs, but I might be incorrect there.
Did he sunlight too?
What's that?
Sunlight?
Sunlight, absolutely. You can't get away from it. And sunlight is yellow, right? I mean, there's no question about it. But the like I said, when you're looking to paint a local, understanding the local you're dealing with is important. But then you have to very consciously consider what is the color of the light source that I'm dealing with, because it will influence that local as it goes up and down in value. Number 3, who can venture a guess? What's the third thing to consider?
Color reflections.
Have you been in this class before? Did you say that?
No, I was studying colors theory.
Yes. Very basic. The third thing you have to consider is the color of anything that's reflecting into that local. Very important. Why do we have black under here? Because we've taken that out of the equation, right? Next week, whoever's coming in next week, we're going to deal with number 3, having not only the local and a color of the light, but we're also going to have to address how other hues work into that. Okay, so I've got 3 things that I'm going to consider. But that answers the question, hopefully, that as I'm looking at this, it's not a matter of just, I can just tune out now. I have my thread, I've got a red object, I'm just going to go to town gradating that, light to dark. Now, there's also the question of how the color of the light is influencing it. In this case, it's shifting that hue in this direction a little bit. And then, of course, at various spots, I have to worry about chroma reduction, intensity reduction. For anyone who's directly behind me, if I'm looking at as minimal as that shadow is right there, if I look at that shadow on the red object, and I look at the corresponding darker area of my thread, does the intensity of that look the same as the intensity of that? And if you say yes, I'm going to say no.
No.
No. So I might be down here working on the value that I need, but I'm going to have to be very conscious about pulling some of that gray, that neutral, into this to drop the intensity level to what's in front of me. And all that you're going to see me do. But I wanted to walk you through at least what's going to be rolling around in my head as I'm working. Okay. Any questions at this point? All right. And I found out, silly me, I thought we were only going till 5. I've got you till 6. I'm going to ride you till 6 o'clock. I can't wait. No sleep.
How
No
often,
rest.
I have a question.
Yes.
How often is something very intense in the shadow? And
The only
how often do you see that? Or
Only when it's
it-
got something strong reflecting into it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just depends on what's next to it. But usually, I mean, any color, as it turns away from the light, it's dropping in intensity rapidly.
So would you say reflected light, or would you say the actual reflected shadow area?
It's the color of anything, it's light reflected from anything that's around.
So it's the reflected light in the shadow that's
Correct.
usually
The more
the
chromatic.
more chromatic. Yeah.
That's right,
Okay.
that's right. Yep, you got it. And like I said, next week you're gonna see that. I mean, I'm trying to design the still life painting, so you're gonna have to address that. And of course, then the question there is, well, how does if I have a red object and I have a blue fabric underneath, well, you can logically assume that the color in the shadow is gonna go darker in value, probably a little less intense than that, but what hue is it gonna settle on? Probably somewhere in the purple range. So just like when the light mixes in, colored objects around it reflect colored light into it and pull it in another direction.
Do you dip your brush in pure turpentine?
For,
What your paint, how you're drawing the paints down?
oh, no, that's in in this case, oh, sorry, we were using liquid before. I would pour out a little bit of linseed oil. And then I'm putting it in the linseed as I'm pulling these threads. Does that answer your question? Yeah. The I only use the spirits for the cleaning the brush. Okay. So, first order of business, Susie, you can be the paint yourself. On the laying procedure, what's the thing I need to do first?
Step 1, drawing. Mark the optical and shadow boundaries.
I'm just going to grab, if I could have this set up, I would. I'm going to grab a 5 value, dip in the oil. Now, okay, now this I have to do. Who in here has worked with oil paint before? I mean, raise them high. I want to see, maybe what's more important, who has not worked in oil paint before? No shame. Okay. And the only reason I'm asking is I might start talking like, well, yes, of course, you're going to dip in your linseed, and then you're going to do that. I take for granted that everyone has not worked in. Watercolor? Watercolor? Sue?
Drawing.
Okay, all right, okay. The linseed oil acts as your water, okay? When you pour out the linseed, what I'm doing first is I'm dipping in the linseed, getting a little bit extra off, and then I'm dipping it into my paint to make it a little creamier. Otherwise, the paint, as you've probably seen so far, is like toothpaste, right? I want to thin that a little bit to paint with.
Why linseed oil and not liquid?
You can use liquid. I hate the quality of liquid. So again, it's, sorry, I'm giving you my little idiosyncrasies.
They gum it up in like when to dry out.
Well, liquid is great. I've since started to use it in the linseed to expedite the drying, but
Right.
liquid by itself, if you're not using it for glazing, for me, just smells disgusting, feels disgusting.
Okay.
I use Galka gel, but
Galka is
I
good.
like that more. It's not as yellow as liquid, and it shouldn't yellow in the future too.
The
It's
Galka?
archival. Yeah, it's more archival.
All right. Now you have a big canvas, right? And I told you to get a 16 by 20, so I don't want to see what I don't want to see what I'm about to do, which is these little things. That's a 16 by 20. I want to see good, healthy spaces taken up, but no rulers here, right? Come on, we can all draw a long rectangle. And I would draw the shadow boundaries, but I really can't see any shadow boundaries. I'll make an indication there roughly when the other thing is John probably told you, those who have been here, squint. If you don't walk out of here with crow's feet, you're not doing it right. For those that don't already have them, like me. I'm going to squint so that I can see, obviously the shadow is from here down. And if I can see any element of the cast shadow, there are two types of shadow, form and cast. Form shadow is the shadow on the object where it turns away from the light. Cast shadow is where the light is being stopped by something else. So I have form and cast that I need to address, at least, again, I'm giving everyone the pass that we've got multiple light sources, just do the best you can.
Which gray did you pull?
I took a number 5 gray as my drawing gray. So I have my, what's called the optical boundary, which is the outside edge, and I've made it just a mark for the shadow, just where I'm going to get that shadow painted. And that's the shadow boundary, shadow boundaries. Sue, tee me up.
Step 2, background.
Background. To get rid of all this white, I'm going to get my background first. Now, I'm going to give you an insight.